Welcome back, everyone. Today I played my first round in the 2023 73rd Oregon Open chess tournament in Oregon, which is a state in Oregon. So in this game, in the first round, I played an 1800, so I'm going to try to put some pressure and try to get off to a good start. So I play e4, we get the Alekhine defense with knight to f6. This is kind of more of a rare opening. It doesn't push a pawn, but it just moves the knight out like this. So I attack the knight with the pawn, and then after a few more moves, I got this big white center here. However, and black has not made any pawn moves. However, black can play d6 and start to chip away at the center. And what's going to end up happening is I have these two pawns here, which is good, but black can play maybe e5 and start to attack the center. So that's going to be black's idea, and white's idea is to keep the center and just have a space advantage. So I go bishop e3, bishop e3, develop my pieces, and now I play b3 after knight c6. So the point of this is to add another defender to the c4 pawn, because if I castle here, I didn't like that after knight b4, it attacks the bishop. And apparently now I can play b3, but after I lose this bishop, I didn't really see a reason to allow black to get the two bishops, even though this position might be slightly better for white. So I play b3 here, and another point of b3 is now after a move like d5 and c5, black no longer gets to play knight c4 because the pawn covers the square, so instead knight has to come to d7. And it looks like there's a free pawn here, but this is kind of similar to lines in the King's Indian, where black plays e5 and sacrifices the pawn because if the knight takes, then there's this discover attack, knight takes e4. Black can play knight takes c5 here, and now after I take and black takes, now black has basically equalized, and black's actually a lot better here because the bishop is also opened up an attack on the rook. So after b3, my opponent plays e5, and e5 is kind of a suspicious move because although it puts a pawn in the center, it not only blocks the bishop, but it also creates a backward pawn on d6. So this pawn is going to become a potential target. And the computer says I should play d5 here to lock this pawn here, and then after knight b4 attacking the bishop to just drop all the way back to b1. But this is very unnatural, and it also blocks the rook in after f5. It looks like these two black pawns are pretty good, but it turns out that computers are just much better than humans, and with this connect 4 here, white's just a slightly bit better because this pawn here, and even though only the knight can go after it at the moment, black's pieces, knights on the queen side, aren't doing that well. However, instead I played this move bishop e4 to open up the queen to defend the pawn, and the idea is if black trades, then if black trades some pieces, with the pawn, then this pawn is now isolated and is just going to be a really big weakness. So my opponent plays queen to e7, lining up the queen on this pin. I castle out of the pin. Now after f5, I play knight to d5, attacking the queen and the knight. So black cannot take my bishop because I just beat the queen. So my opponent takes, I take with a check, king goes to the corner, and now I play rook e1, and I spent a lot of time on this move because I was trying to figure out how to keep this pawn as a weakness without, so I don't want to play pawn takes e5 here because then black could throw to the weakness and then you can start to push these pawns here. So I don't want to take, but the problem is if I don't take, then black always has this really annoying move f4, kicking the bishop away and then taking this pawn. So how do I stop this threat and also keep this pawn here? It's not exactly very obvious. I don't really want to play f4 because black can just play e4 and get a protected passed pawn. I can probably also just take this and it doesn't work here because the bishop's not protected. Black can just take, and I cannot take with the knight because black just wins the bishop. And I also can't take with the bishop because then takes, and then queen e3 is a fork. So I play rook e1, and the idea is after f4 to just drop the bishop back, and now I'm threatening to take this pawn because of the pin. And if black takes this pawn, then I will just take with the knight, discover attack. And this would be really good because now this pawn is here, and also this king is starting to open up. So here my opponent plays kind of an inaccurate move, queen g5. So the idea is to try to attack the king, but with this bishop on the backwards diag covering g2, and just these pieces here around the king, it's not going to be that scary. So I just take, the pawn takes, and now you see that there's kind of a weakness here on e4. So I'm going to move my knight to try to cover that square. So I go to g3. Not really a real reason for that. Just going to c3 basically accomplishes the same thing. If I just go here, there's not really a difference. So knight d4, knight e4. And now my opponent plays queen h4, and I thought this was a mistake because it allows bishop to b4 attacking the rook, and that wins some material. I thought black should have played queen to e7, but here white is already a little bit better because now I can play bishop to c3, and now I just have better pieces, and I've successfully gotten a better pawn structure with this queenside majority and also this very nice knight on e4. Okay, so my opponent plays queen h4, and this does allow bishop to b4 attacking the rook, and now with these bishops pointing towards the king side, it's going to be very hard to stop my knight from just infiltrating here and giving a really nasty check on f7. So my opponent plays rook d8, I play knight f7, rook d7, and now this allows knight f7, which is a check, and it just looks like it wins an exchange. However, here I'd start to think for a really long time because I see this really interesting idea of sacrificing the queen. With queen takes d4, and the idea is to check on e8, and you'll see that the evaluation says that this is good, but I obviously did not know that in the game, and I was trying to figure out if this was any good at all. So I've sacrificed a queen, I've gotten a knight for it so far. Black has to block with the bishop, so I got at least another bishop. However, and it also looks like I'm going to get more pieces like this. However, if I'm wrong here, then I might just lose the game because I'm down a queen, and I'm already guaranteed at least an exchange. So it would be kind of crazy if I did this and it didn't work. And I also at this point had about 24 minutes on the clock, and there is no extra time control. It's just 100 minutes plus 30 the entire game. So if I go too long, get too long time, I don't want that to happen either. So after bishop f8, I was looking at moves like takes and knight e8, but I saw that nothing in this variation. King h6, apparently this is still good for white, but you have to play some really weird moves, which are really hard to find, especially so deep into lines. And the line I was looking at most was knight to f5, opening up the bishop, attacking the queen also. And the idea is that if the queen goes anywhere, well, first of all, if takes, I thought that bishop takes f8, and I'm threatening a checkmate and a discovered attack. However, and if the queen moves, then I'm going to take with the bishop, because I'm threatening to checkmate on g7 with a double check. And if you take here, it's checkmate. If you take here, it's checkmate. If you go here, it's still a double checkmate like this. So this would have been very nice. However, black doesn't have to do this. Black can just simply take, and then when I take with the bishop, rook d8 to attack the rook, and now if I do a discovered check, I only get the queen for a rook, and I'm actually down an exchange here, and I'm probably not going to win the game. However, the computer just sees these weird moves instantly, and it sees that after bishop f8, I can take the bishop and play this really nasty move, rook to e1. And it just brings the rook into the attack, and this is very hard to spot because, like, you just check with the rook's here, king attacks the rook, you gotta do something about that, right? Well, no, you just move the rook here because if the king takes the rook, knight to f5 check, and suddenly the king's in a box. So all these squares are covered, and black just has to stack all the pieces, and after all the dust clears, white's going to be up a clean piece. Okay, and you might be asking, well, what if the king doesn't take the rook? Well, if the king doesn't take the rook, then there are still threats. So for example, if the king tries to run to h6, then I have knight to f5 check with a fork. After the pawn takes, rook to e6, and after king to g7, rook to g8 check, because if you take, this is a double check, and then checkmate on g8. So I didn't see any of this, but this is just a really crazy line. The king goes to f7, rook to d6 check to block the rook from taking the pawn. King must go here, rook h6 check, discovered check on the queen. Black must block with the rook, and now I don't even take the queen, I just check. And then after a few more moves, I think I eventually take the queen and then just check and mate. And if black does nothing, then the threat is just to play rook g8 check, and then knight f5 check, and then bishop f8 and bishop f3. And if king goes to f6, then it's checkmate in 5 with knight to e8, king f5, bishop e6, and eventually checkmate. Now, I didn't see a single thing in any of these variations, so I didn't go into it because if something fails and I just have to trade a few pieces, then it just all goes wrong because I'm not up any, I'm down a queen. However, it turns out that this was the best move, and after I went out to f7, this actually throws away the advantage because although I win an exchange, my pieces are kind of weirdly placed, and they're not very good at defending, which is what I have to do next after pawn to f3. Now this move is very annoying because it just puts a pawn in front of my king. It's not very comfortable. And black's strat is just to play queen to g4. So if I do nothing, if I just try to if I play like rook c1, then just queen g4 threatens checkmate, and then queen to h3 sets up the lobster pincer with or the lolly checkmate with it's just gonna be checkmate. Um, okay. So I put bishop d5, trying to attack the pawn like this. I was looking at lines like queen d3, trying to go to f1, but now after bishop f5, I didn't really like this because black's pieces are really getting active. And after queen f1, it's just not very comfortable because black has moves like e4, just taking the pawn. It's really good because the f3 square, and also rook e3 isn't really what I want to do either because there's always knight c2 forks in situations where I have to move the queen to f1, so it's just getting really messy. And although it's not as messy if I sacked the queen, at least I would have been winning if I sacked the queen. So I'm getting really, I'm during the game I'm really unhappy at this point, and I'm just trying to look for some way to just simplify the game. And luckily my opponent just does just that by checking on e2 and allowing me to sacrifice the rook back. And at this point now I'm just completely winning because I'm up a pawn, I have great pieces, and black's not really developed and has a bad king. So this was a really bad blunder by my opponent. And what my opponent should have done is just live with being down in exchange and have really good play. So for example, bishop f5, this threatens to play knight c2. That would get the exchange back, and black still has a good attack on the king side. And if I play g3, black doesn't play queen h3 because then I can take the pawn. But black just plays queen h5, and although black's down in exchange, white doesn't have a good position anymore. It's black with all the compensation with this really strong knight on d4 and these light square weaknesses around my king. However, after knight takes e2, knight to e2 check, I just simply sack the rook. I win the pawn back also, so now I'm up a pawn. And now after a few more moves, bishop g4, it's just a mistake, but the position was already bad. I can take this pawn, taking advantage of this pin, and now after queen h5 and rook e1, my opponent resigns because I'm simply threatening to play queen to e8 check, so and also threatening to take this pawn. So if black does like bishop f5 or something, then queen to e8 check, and then rook e8, and after bishop f8, bishop to c3 is checkmate. So I do end up winning this game. It was kind of shaky near this part after f3. However, my opponent didn't find the best attacking moves and just let me simplify into a really good position. So I do end up getting this win. My next round will be soon, and I may or may not do a recap on that game, but should be some more recaps during this tournament. There's 6 rounds. There's going to be 5 more rounds, and we'll see how I do in those rounds. Okay, bye.